Hello, hello. Um, I'm Caroline Jaine, the Resilience Guide, and welcome to a masterclass called Trigger, which is a deep dive into trauma. I say deep, I'm hoping this session will last probably about 20 minutes at most. So it's not going to be only going to be as deep as we can go in 20 minutes, but it will give you an overview, really. I'm going to cover the different types of trauma, so how you can recognize it, some trauma truths, how we process trauma and what our normal responses are, and what happens when you get triggered. And then with this knowledge, or what you're going to do with this knowledge. So there might well be people joining halfway through, and that's absolutely fine. I am recording this session, just so you know, and with my limited ability to operate technology, I believe I'm only recording my screen, which is me. So if you could keep your cameras off, just in case you pop up anyway, that would be great. So, what's the definition of trauma? So trauma definition, if you look in the dictionary, is a deeply disturbing or a distressing event. So it doesn't describe what the event is, it just says it's a deeply disturbing or distressing event. That is trauma. So we can see already from this that that could be anything at all. So if we look at the 5 trauma truths, the very first one is that trauma is not an event. So it's important to know that. It's not an event, it's our experience of that event. So trauma is not an event, but it's our experience of it. So that's the first trauma truth. The second trauma truth is our response to an experience that we find deeply disturbing or distressing is to adapt. So if we experience something upsetting, then we will adapt to it. So that's the second trauma truth. So one is it's our experience, 2 is it's how we adapt to that experience. And 3 is why do we adapt? We adapt to keep ourselves safe. It's a survival strategy. And obviously the things that are learned when we're younger stay with us the longest. So it's not just that we adapt to keep ourselves safe, to survive. Sometimes those things don't make sense. So it's maybe the perception of safe rather than what we consider safe. So the fourth trauma truth is that if your deeply distressing or disturbing experience is not properly processed, that will impact on our behaviour. Not who we are, but how we behave from that point on. So the fifth trauma truth is understanding and identifying our own and other people's responses, i.e. their adaptation strategies or their coping strategies, is the first step towards processing. And this is what we call being trauma informed. So it's being aware, basically, that a lot of our responses and our behaviour are adaptations to something that we have found deeply distressing or disturbing, i.e. trauma. I hope you're following me on this. Right, so now we understand the trauma truths. Just to give you an example, a 8-year-old girl gets bitten by a small brown dog in the park, and she rushes into the arms of her granny, who comforts her and says, there, I told you to avoid dogs. So she's very frightened, disturbed, distressed. So what is her behaviour going to be, and her adaptations going to be? I'm going to stay away from small brown dogs because I've had that experience, and Granny confirmed that it was a dangerous thing. So that's one strategy. Grannies are safe. That's another thing that they might have learned from that traumatic experience. And maybe things like, oh, I don't think I'll go in the park anymore because that's not safe. So that's our coping mechanism. That 8-year-old child will be adapting that strategy to keep herself safe and to survive. Exactly the same way as if you get burnt from fire, you learn it's hot, I'm not going to go near that again. It's to keep us safe. It's just when things, our idea of safe, it becomes sort of disruptive and it doesn't make sense anymore. So just some examples. Hypervigilance developed in a war zone, for example, is very common. I've never been a soldier, but I did serve some time as a civilian in Iraq. And when I came out of that environment, I was very hypervigilant. I don't just mean keeping an eye on things, checking out places and making sure I was in control of situations. I mean like checking my doors locked, not once, not twice, maybe 4 times before I went to bed, and checking windows are locked, checking I had everything I needed on me. That kind of hypervigilance was learned from keeping myself safe in a dangerous situation. It's no longer with me quite as much. I'm still quite a hypervigilant person, but I've learned and I've dealt with that. So other coping mechanisms or survival strategies might be that you avoid conflict at all costs, maybe because in the past you've been hurt by conflict. So people that are avoidant maybe have learned the best way to manage conflict is to stay away from it. I met once a traffic officer who said he had no empathy because he felt completely numb to any emotion. Straight away, I understood that feeling numb is actually a feeling. Feeling numb is his survival strategy, possibly because he's been exposed to so much distressing, disturbing things in his life that's how he copes. That's the best way of coping. Another issues going back from childhood, and we'll talk a bit about this in a minute. Maybe, say, for example, you felt betrayed by your mother when you were growing up. Say you felt rejected, let down during a critical moment, a traumatic, distressing, upsetting moment. You felt your mother let you down. You could learn from that, and your behavior could reflect that you don't trust women. And that's quite common, not uncommon, should I say, that not trusting women or men, if it's a father that's let you down, comes about through childhood trauma. And I've seen relationships where people keep returning to be in relationships with people that hurt you or people that are no good for you. And potentially this is a learned strategy. It sounds bizarre because how can that be something that makes you safe? But maybe you learned growing up that the best way to deal with someone that was hurting you was to befriend them, you know? Tend and befriend, it's called. And they've identified this as a new, like fawning in the fight, flight, or fright response to stress. Fawning or tending and befriending is something which we can learn through pain and trauma. So that's just a couple of wild examples there of how our response to something distressing or disturbing and the way we cope with it, our strategy, the way we adapt, can go on and inform us for times to come. So let's have a look quickly, aware that we're kind of running out of time already, at the different types of trauma. So acute trauma is the one we think about most. It's the thing where some big bad shit happened, a car accident, or you were assaulted, or you nearly died, or it could be some abuse you suffered as a child. Things stay stuck with you. It has not been completed. So acute trauma means trauma that a big thing happened and you've never resolved it in the actual moment, if that makes sense. So that's acute trauma, and that's the one that we often think of trauma when you think of stereotypes of people with PTSD. So you may have heard of vicarious or secondary trauma. This is through being close to or working with someone else who's experienced trauma. So it means you're not directly affected, but remember, if you find something disturbing or distressing, you can have a response where you adapt to it. So for example, one of the jobs I had was reviewing complaints against police officers, and one complaint was that a police officer did not carry out CPR on someone who'd passed away or looked like they were passing away. And I had to watch on body-worn camera footage from several different police officers. Several times I had to watch somebody basically dying, not being treated, who was lying on the floor. Probably I spent 2 hours watching that footage over and over to check really at what point should that officer have intervened or not. And I was okay, but that image of the person dead on the floor did replay in my mind a few times. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And that was me trying to process it. So that's secondary trauma. I wasn't there, but I understood it through watching something on a screen. The big type of trauma that's not really understood is developmental trauma. So this happens when your nervous system is developing. So that's when these patterns of behavior stay with us the most. It could be, I mentioned, the feeling of betrayal from a mother. It could be that you were bullied at school. It could be that someone who you perceive is supposed to protect you, a parent or a carer, has let you down. The way you responded to that is your adaptation strategy for survival. And that is very difficult to break, but it's really important to understand. And most people are on a journey with this. And I think nearly everybody will have some kind of developmental trauma attached to their childhood. There's even thought that you can have trauma from childbirth, from the way you were born and brought into this world, can impact how you respond to the world. Even further back than that, there is a lot of scientific evidence now that you can have experienced trauma, distress, disturbing things whilst you're in the womb. So maybe you hear shouting, maybe your mother who's carrying you did not have a good time. So think of all those pregnant women who are perhaps living in war zones or really challenging environments. Potentially the cortisol that's running through their system as a result of their stress can be passed on to the unborn child. Even further back than that, there's intergenerational trauma, and there's lots of experiments been done on this, quite phenomenal experiments, some involving rats, and I've seen one involving crows. With the rat experiment, they spray it, it's not very nice, by the way. They sprayed some cherry blossom scent, and they did a minor electric shock on a rat. This is going back years, so this is not a recent thing. And the rat learned very quickly to associate cherry blossom with the electrocution. But what they discovered was 2 generations on, so the rat's babies and then their babies, grandchildren of the rat, if you sprayed cherry blossom into the cage, they had a similar response as if it was about a trauma was about to happen, as if they were distressed. So there is evidence to suggest, and there's lots and lots more research happening with humans about whether the stress of our forefathers and their trauma, the things they've experienced, can get passed on through generations. And of course, there is also collective trauma, which happens in wartime, or it might happen around issues like racism or homophobia, where whole groups of people experience trauma at once. So those are the main types of trauma: acute trauma, vicarious or secondary trauma, developmental trauma, preconscious, precognitive trauma, intergenerational trauma, and collective trauma. So those are the main things. So it's quite a big, deep subject. So how do we process trauma and what is a normal response to it? So when you experience something distressing or disturbing, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. One of the ways you activate it is by going, that sends a signal to our brains and our bodies to for our sympathetic nervous system to start working. What happens then? All our essential, non-essential functions rather, all our non-essential functions, they shut down. And we go into instinctive survival mode. And there's lots of things that we would normally do, you know, it's the fight, flight or freeze. You might, if you're just suffered a sudden bereavement, for example, you might want to rant and shout and scream, and all these things are very good for us. Bottling it up is not. So the kind of instinctive way we deal with someone who's freaking out is to give them a Valium or say calm down, or but it's actually super important that they carry on processing this. It's all very much part of it. When I worked at the Foreign Office, one of the things that they learned just before they introduced TRIM, which is the trauma risk management, the way of assessing people's responses to trauma, they realised that if there was a big incident like a bomb, and this came about after the Istanbul bombings, that people were all sent home. They were all sent home like, oh, we've had a terrible shock, people have died. And going home, if you're on posting in the Foreign Office, is being sent back to the UK, and separating everybody. And they realised that actually the best thing they could do in a situation like that is have everybody who's experienced the same thing to be together to talk it through and to process it. So it's really important to process things. So TRIM, for example, as I mentioned, is a very structured way. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with TRIM. I've been a TRIM practitioner. So what happens is shortly after, but not immediately after, the exposure to the potentially distressing event, a TRIM assessor will visit the person, usually at their request, and ask a number of very structured questions. And those questions all are in relation to a natural response to trauma. They might be, are you having problems sleeping? Are you replaying the incident in your mind, as I was with that body-worn footage of that person who passed away? So there's a set of questions. I think there's maybe 12 or 15 of them, I can't remember. And the person is reassured that a lot of these responses are completely normal. And then in 28 days' time, you ask the same questions again, and you identify whether there's been any improvement. And usually, everyone that I've done a TRIM assessment on, there has been a diminishment. And that reassures people that there is a process going on, that we have natural responses, that maybe we don't feel as sociable, but it's only if they continue in the long term do we consider further intervention. If you think about an animal, if my cat gets into a fight, which it does quite often, it will come back in a bit injured and a bit wounded, and curl up in a little ball somewhere. This afternoon it was in the flower bed, and he'll just sleep. He'll just sleep off the trauma. And just sleeping, being really tired and letting your body heal is actually a very normal response to trauma. So it's not just animals, but humans can do that too. So it's only if left trapped, untreated, do things become potentially post-traumatic stress disorder, or people maybe have addiction problems, for example. So what does being triggered mean? We understand where trauma comes from. It's an adaptive behaviour. what does being triggered mean? Triggered is just any stimulus. It could be a sight, a sound, a smell, or even a specific thought or an emotion that reminds us of that past trauma. So people's responses vary. There might be fear, anxiety, anger, shame even, or panic, or they might have a racing heartbeat. So think of that 8-year-old girl in the park. Fast forward 30 years, if she walks through that same park and sees a small brown dog, she might feel exactly the same fear that she did as an 8-year-old child. You might have difficulty breathing, you might shake, you might sweat or feel a bit faint. And behaviour can really vary when someone's triggered. They can just want to run away, definitely a runaway type person. They could become aggressive, they could withdraw completely. For example, when I was evacuated from Iraq, we're going back nearly 20 years now. I was evacuated on the day before fireworks night in the UK. So you can imagine, I don't need to tell you, but I was my coping strategies as fireworks were going off outside, I was hiding under the table. Even though rationally I knew I was in the UK, I was fine. That was my response to it. Some, adaptive strategies. One horrible story I have is that it's not the same traffic officer, but it's a different one who said that they, and I know this for firemen as well, they will avoid barbecues because of the smell of cooking meat brings back things for them. So that's being triggered. So interestingly, triggers aren't always predictable. So I lost my first husband to suicide, and when I started working for the police, my first job for the police was answering 999 calls, and I was really worried what I was going to do if someone phoned and said they wanted to kill themselves. I thought that was going to be a trigger. Turned out it wasn't a trigger at all. The very first 999 call I got was actually from a suicidal person, and I was fine with it. In fact, I found it quite healing, quite therapeutic, and I felt like I could, do some good in that area. But from that same incident that happened many years ago, a trigger for me is somebody being late or not being where they're supposed to be I can't get hold of them. And that's all because of the circumstances surrounding my first husband's death. So it's not always obvious, is what I'm saying. If you work with somebody who has had a response to trauma, you won't always be able to predict exactly what it is. So I think we've definitely overshot the 20 minutes. We're on 25 minutes. What's next? So it's important, if you're watching this and you've identified that you may be carrying some trapped or unprocessed, undigested trauma, that you seek support from someone who is trauma-informed root cause therapist. Okay, I'm not qualified to do that. I'm trauma-informed, but I'm not a qualified therapist yet, should we say. I do believe that we live far too much in our minds, far too cognitively, and that most of our unprocessed trauma we carry in our bodies. And our trauma is only resolved when our body knows it's resolved. And if you want further reading, I'm just going to turn this, it's telling me I've got 10 minutes left, but we're fine, we'll do it that. This book here, which some of you will already know, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, is probably the trauma practitioner's Bible, and it's a lot about how your body will tell you where your trauma is. So I would also say, if you want to begin healing, processing your trauma, it's really important that you are in a safe place. And I mean, when I say safe, I mean psychologically safe, physically safe, obviously, but that you're in a safe place mentally as well, and that you've got people around you that you feel safe with. You know, I hope you're not watching this on a kind of break whilst you're at work and you're going to jump back in and start processing your trauma. I know you won't do that. So now we understand trauma. I hope as well that you take away from this is you begin to understand it in other people, and you see people's, unexplainable, erratic, maybe aggressive or behavior, maybe they withdraw, that you start to understand that behavior as a survival adaptation, that it's not who they are, it's just their response to trauma they may have experienced, and perhaps they don't even know about themselves. So I'm going to finish there. That's the lesson on trauma. That is the deep dive. If you want to know more about trauma and loads of other things, I am really excited that I am going to be opening the doors soon to the Unbreakable Path program. This is a really cost-effective way for people who are serious about understanding things like this, understanding themselves and their own personal development through the lens of resilience. You need to know that it's okay to spend time on yourself. And if you're someone that supports and works to support other people, that you will do this better if you develop yourself. It will also have an impact on things like sleep, digestion, headaches, your outlook on life, and help you become less overwhelmed. What we want to avoid is burnout. This is a group program, so you won't be alone. There's other like-minded people. It's very much guided by what you feel comfortable with. I'm already running the program for one-to-one clients, so this is the first time I'm doing it as a group. It's very exciting. I also believe that you've got all the answers within you. But if you absolutely don't want to do the program in a group, I also have a limited number of one-to-one places. So that is me. I'm Caroline Jaine. Bang on half an hour, which is longer than the 20 minutes as advertised. Thank you for joining me. And if you want anything else or you want to send me a message, then please do. And I hope that you found that interesting.